Of requirements goes back to the poor communication. And then a huge one that Alan talked about quite a bit this morning is lack of stakeholder buy-in. It can be a perfect solution, but if the voters don't understand it, the parties don't understand it, the civil society doesn't understand it, then it can be a failed project. With that in mind, how do we develop successful election technology projects? First of all, we have to have a clear sense of mission. Why are we doing elections? What are our goals and objectives in doing elections? If we have a clear sense of who we are as an election management body, then we have some basis for integrity, and that integrity can extend into our technology implementation. If instead we have a fuzzy idea of what it is that we're about, and someone comes along with the technology and says, this will do it for you, then we can get driven off the path really quickly. We have to have clear goals, realistic expectations about what can be accomplished. We have to be willing to re-engineer our processes. Introduction of technology frequently means that we have to change the law and the manual procedures by which we do things. And finally, once again, back to choosing the appropriate technology. I was going to take these one at a time, but I'm going to just jump through the mission and goals. Again, Alan talked about quite a bit. I will talk about realistic expectations, and I know a couple of my colleagues have already talked about this, but I just recently was in a country that was pushing biometrics because they said that when we asked a survey of what were the problems that people thought a biometric system would solve, they included keeping deceased people off the register, keeping underage voters off the register, keeping people who were not citizens off the register, making sure that there was no impersonation in the polling station on election day, none of those which are addressed by a biometric system. When we ask how much concern there was among the political parties about duplicate registrations on this small Pacific Island state, there was none. Nobody was really very concerned about duplicate registrations. They were small polling stations. Everybody knew everybody else pretty much, but they still thought that they needed to implement a certain technology to solve problems that the technology didn't solve, and the problem that the technology solved, they didn't even have. So having realistic expectations about what the technology can accomplish is critical to have a successful and appropriate implementation. Re-engineering, I'll just quickly say that I also was involved in the country recently, and I'm trying to stay out of Africa with my negative examples, although there are plenty of them here that we could talk about, but we'll do this to protect the guilty. We'll point to countries outside of Africa. In Pakistan, they've just implemented a huge high-tech voter registration system. Now, the biggest problem with their voter register before they implemented their high-tech database was that they sent out teams of uneducated and untrained enumerators who went door to door and took information about every voter. And what was written on the forms was terrible. In many cases, people would show up and the village chief would say, oh, don't worry, just you sit here and have some tea. I'll send my assistant out and he'll take care of all of that data. And they came back with huge inflated lists and bad data. So they put in this great, really good database system, and they sent the same team of enumerators out to gather the data. So now they've got the same garbage in a really expensive high-tech database. If we don't re-engineer the processes by which we do our elections, then the technology in many, many cases won't help us. Probably the most critical step in implementing appropriate technology is identify the problem. If we don't know, if we can't answer how things are now and how they should be, and what's the difference between those two and why should they be that way, then we probably are not going to have any success in improving things with technology. Identifying the problem is often an iterative thing. Frequently, people want to implement technologies to solve problems, as in the example I gave earlier, problems that don't exist. So it's critical that we take the time to identify what are our not just what's the problem that this technology will address,